Hello, my name is Grace McCoy. I was born profoundly deaf and I am currently an elementary teacher at Michigan School for the Deaf. I am taking classes towards my deaf education degree, and this is part of my project. I have a wide variety of experience and exposure to different approaches and options for deaf and hard of hearing students. In this video, I will help others understand about deafness and share information that is important for teachers to know and understand about teaching students who are deaf and hard of hearing. Deaf and hard of hearing, or also known as DHH, are everywhere. There are 70 million deaf and hard of hearing in the world. 90% are born to hearing parents, and the average reading comprehension level is 4th grade. Also note that I will be focusing on students who are deaf and hard of hearing because it's very common that people lose their hearing as they get older. Now I will explain a little about hearing loss. To help you to understand, I will explain the average hearing. Here's a picture of our ear. Sounds are everywhere and they go into your ear. When it goes into the canal, the tympanic membrane or the eardrum vibrates, which causes the bones to move to send the information into the cochlea. There is fluid or tiny hair cells inside the cochlea. When the sound comes into the cochlea, the fluid moves and the hair cells picks up the movement and sends the signal to the auditory or the hearing nerve, which sends it to the brain. Sounds are measured by decibels or dB. If you look at this chart, the soft sounds start around 0 decibels, and then it gradually gets louder to over 100 decibels. The normal hearing is 0 to 20 decibels, where you can hear leaves moving with the wind, the birds chirping, and the water faucet running. On the right side of the column, you can see 4 different degrees of hearing loss below the normal hearing. First, the light purple. The softest sound a person can hear is somewhere between 25 to 40 decibels, like a clock ticking. Then he has mild hearing loss. The second hearing loss is moderate or dark purple, where a person can hear the softest sound somewhere in between 40 to 70 decibels, like a baby crying. Thirdly, there is severe hearing loss, or the red, where a person can hear somewhere between 70 to 90 decibels and higher sounds such as a dog barking, phone ringing, and the sound of a piano. The fourth hearing loss, or the black one, is profound, which can vary from 90 to 120 decibels. This is where I fall. Also, notice that the yellow banana shape on the chart, that is also known as a speech banana. In summary of this chart, there is a wide range of hearing loss. Another thing that I want to point out is that there are 2 types of hearing loss. The first one is congenital hearing loss, which is present at birth. The second one is acquired hearing loss, which it begins after birth from illness or an accident. Therefore, some deaf and hard of hearing children have congenital hearing loss and others have acquired hearing loss. For example, I was born deaf, so that is congenital hearing loss. I want to clarify that hard of hearing has some sort of hearing loss, such as mild and moderate. There are many different kinds of hearing aids, but the picture here has an ear mold, and that is very common that hearing aids students use. Those hearing aids help them to be able to hear normal sounds. Their ear still functions well, but the sound just needs to be louder. Let me briefly explain the different parts of a hearing aid before I explain how it works. If you look at the hearing aid, the top part is the microphone. The middle part is the amplifier and the speaker. And the bottom part is the battery to make it work. On the side, there is a dial to control the volume and switch to a different setting. The digital hearing aid picks up the sound from the environment and converts it into an electrical signal, and it sends it to the amplifier. The amplifier increases the volume of the sound, and then it sends it to the receiver or the speaker. The speaker changes to the electrical signal back to the sound, and then it sends to the ear. Then those impulses are sent to the brain. The brain hears and then processes the sound. Hearing aids will not help people who have severe or profound hearing loss, or people known as deaf. Cochlear implants can work for severe or profound hearing loss. In order to make cochlear implants work, the person needs to have a surgery to insert an implant in their head. As you notice, that round metal thing next to the nickel, that's the implant. The circle of that implant is a magnet that is inserted into the skull. And the wire that's wrapped around the cochlea, that is called electrode. The hair cells help to send the message to the hearing nerve. But typically, these hair cells are destroyed or not formed. So the wire helps to send the message to the hearing nerve. Now, let's look at the physical cochlear implant that goes behind the ear. Please note that the cochlear implant may look a little different because there are different companies that make them, but they have the same structure. The top or the main part is the sound processor. The bottom part is the battery that is rechargeable. The loop that connects to the sound processor is the microphone. Another component of this implant is the wire with the circle or the coil that is attached is called the headpiece, which has a magnet to connect with the magnet in the head. Also on the side of the sound processor, there is a dial to control the volume and to switch to a different setting. So how does this work? Is that the sound from the environment goes into the microphone and then it sends it to the sound processor. The sound processor converts it into digital code, and then it transmits the digital code through the wire and the coil. And it continues to send the information to the implant in the head, where it converts the digital coded sound to electrical signals and sends them to the wire or the electrode that's wrapped around the cochlea. The electrodes simulate the hearing nerve fibers to relay the sound signals to the brain where the signals are processed. Some students have 1 or 2 implants, but they can do well just with 1 implant because they are very expensive. Having 2 just helps it to hear where the sound is coming from a little better. Many people have wondered what cochlear implant sounds like, and many people have asked me. I cannot give an answer because I've never heard normally. Now I will play a YouTube video that shows you what it sounds like with a cochlear implant. I will put the link in my list of resources so you can listen to it again.
What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon? What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon? What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon?
What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon?
So, in summary, hearing aids increase the volume like a speaker, and cochlear implants change the sound to electrical signals because the ear doesn't work properly. Because that being said, everyone has their own opinions about hearing aids and cochlear implants. In the deaf culture, they are very proud of their identity. They do not want to wear cochlear implants, but it varies and depends on the person. As you notice, deaf people have their own culture, language, history. I can go into detail, but this is another topic. But I encourage you to research it. But I have one thing that I want to point out because this is a very common question. You will see the word deaf with a lowercase letter and sometimes with an uppercase letter. There is a difference between them. Deaf with the lowercase letter, that is a medical term meaning hearing loss. And deaf with the capital letter means the culture itself and the deaf person is proud of their identity. Sign language plays a huge role in the deaf community. In the United States, we use American Sign Language, or ASL. Please note that there is no universal sign language. And a fun fact is that there are over 350 sign languages in the world. Anyways, ASL is a language that has its own grammar structure, and it uses your hands, facial expression, and body language. As you notice from the beginning of this video, I am signing as well as voicing. just to give you a glimpse of it and inspire you to learn sign language. Please note that I am not signing exact ASL because I am speaking as well. So, I have talked about different kinds of hearing loss, hard of hearing, deaf, hearing aids, cochlear implant, and a little bit about deaf culture and sign language. There are many communication options for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. I will talk about 3 main educational approaches. The first one is oral approach. This is made possible for using hearing aids or cochlear implant, lip reading, and visual cues. Lip reading is reading the lip pattern of a person talking, but there are some disadvantages with that because I want you to be aware of. Lip patterns vary with different people. For example, cleft palate surgery affect lip movement, and it's hard to see the lip movement of men who have a bushy beard or a mustache. In addition, poor lighting and covering your mouth will make lip reading difficult. The goal of oral approach is to develop spoken language skills so the deaf person can function independently in hearing communities. This requires a lot of speech therapy to learn how to hear and read lips to be effective. The second approach is signing only, which uses hand movements, facial expression, and gestures. Communication through sign language do not depend on hearing, but on vision. Deaf and hard of hearing students rely on sign language interpreters to help them to communicate with the hearing world. Total communication is the third approach, which uses many different methods of communication at the same time to communicate, such as sign language, lip reading, speech, interpreters, and cochlear implants. In other words, a person uses all the resources that are provided to be successful. I want to point out that the interpreter translates what you say into sign language, and they interpret everything to help the deaf and hard of hearing student know what's going on like the other peers. Now you know the different communication approaches, and we will discuss the different education options that are provided for deaf and hard of hearing students. Before I start, I want to point out that all deaf and hard of hearing students have an IEP, or an individualized educational plan, regardless of their hearing loss or where they go to school. The first option is mainstream, where a student in a public school with hearing students. Every deaf and hard of hearing student you meet or was mainstream has a different experience because of their IEP to provide the appropriate accommodation to be successful. For example, one student is in a general classroom all day with the interpreter. Another student in a general classroom for most of the day with the accommodations like an FM or a microphone and has special education for a couple hours. So it has a combination of oral approach and total communication. The second option is deaf and hard of hearing program. Typically in every county in Michigan has a deaf and hard of hearing program, and it's becoming more popular today. Some examples are Northview Public School in Grand Rapids to cover Kent County, and Port Huron is the one to cover State Clair County. There are many more, but I just share a few. The deaf program has a deaf and hard of hearing classroom that is a lot like special education for students. Based on the student's IEP, their instructional time will be divided between mainstream classroom and the deaf and hard of hearing classroom. The deaf and hard of hearing students will receive more support compared to mainstream, and it will have some exposure to deaf culture because they are not the only student who is deaf or hard of hearing in the building. In this case, they're mostly using total communication approach. The third option is deaf school. Every state has at least one deaf school. In Michigan, we have one called Michigan School for the Deaf that is in Flint. This school is provided for all deaf and hard of hearing students in the state of Michigan, where they can commute or stay in the dorms during the weekdays and go home on the weekends. The deaf and hard of hearing students are in a classroom all day with all other deaf and hard of hearing students to receive instruction in sign language from the teacher. They get a full exposure to sign language and deaf culture all day, such as the cafeteria, the playground, art, sporting events, to name a few. Sign language approach is used in this case. Therefore, as a teacher, it is important to know the different options to provide the deaf and hard of hearing student to be successful in school. All of these options must be presented in each IEP meeting. I have shared some information with you now. I will share some advice as a deaf teacher. We deaf people can do anything except hear. It is important to believe in them and encourage them. Every person is different and has different stories. So it is important to ask what they need and how to help each deaf and hard of hearing student to be successful in school. As I mentioned, 90% of the deaf are born from hearing parents. The majority of these parents do not know what to do for their child and mostly rely on their doctors. But the problem is that the doctors are not expert about providing free and appropriate education and what is best for the student. It is important to provide the resources for them and do your part of the research. Note that some of the things are not effective for some deaf and hard of hearing students, such as cochlear implants. We, as teachers, need to be there for the deaf and hard of hearing students and families for support. If the parents do not know what to do, they tend to not be supportive or advocate for their child. The parents, even teachers, need to research and decide what is best to support and how to teach effectively. Being supportive and involved makes a huge difference, especially with language development. Another advice I have is to learn to sign. If you sign to your student, it will make their day and show them that you care and you want to know their culture. In addition, you can include signs in your classroom and the curriculum. It helps the deaf and hard of hearing students to feel included. For example, if a student needs to go to the bathroom, he can raise his hand and sign bathroom, and the teacher can give an automatic response quietly. Another example, you can use numbers as a countdown and it provides visual cues. Sample 10, 9, 8, and so forth. You can also have students tell you what letter is correct using the alphabet as a formative assessment. These are some examples, but there are many more that you can use sign language to incorporate in your classroom. Also, this has benefits for other students, especially in public schools, to learn sign language. It provides a new language that will be beneficial when they meet deaf people because they are all around us all the time. Sign language is a bridge to spoken words. Now, I want to share about some things in the classroom. Try to include many visuals on the board and provide manipulatives because the deaf and hard of hearing students are very visual. That's why I also added visual in this video. Besides visual aids, be familiar with the use of technology such as closed captioning, subtitles, and FM. I want to point out the difference between closed captioning and subtitles. Closed captioning are designed for hard of hearing and deaf, and that includes the dialogue and description of sound like a music playing or the door slammed. Subtitles are designed for language translation of dialogue with no audio description included. When you have deaf and hard of hearing students who have hearing aids or cochlear implants, please be aware of the background noises because it can be a distraction and the student will have a hard time understanding what's happening, such as people walking in the hallway, the fan blowing while the teacher is teaching, and so forth. One thing about hearing aids and cochlear implants is that they don't discriminate sounds. They pick up everything and put it together. That is challenging to pick one sound to listen like hearing people. What can we do is to help. We can close the door to minimize the sound and don't put the fan right next to the person who is deaf or hard of hearing, just to name a few. Another thing that I want to discuss is that one of the most common misunderstandings about cochlear implants. They do not hear the person. It's just a tool to help them to become more aware of their surroundings. Also, using cochlear implant is a lot of work because a person needs to process more compared to hearing people. Besides background noises in cochlear implants, it is important to look at your deaf and hard of hearing student if you're signing or talking so they can see you signing or read your lips. If there's an interpreter present, it is your job to look at the student, not the interpreter, because you're not talking to the interpreter. Also, please don't talk very slow because it makes it worse. For example, that drives deaf and hard of hearing people crazy. If the student does not respond, please don't misinterpret that as rudeness or lack of interest, especially students with hearing aids and cochlear implants, because they are working very hard to focus with all the sounds around them. Now I have listed some sites as some resources to help you to get started if you want additional information. I hope this video helps you understand deafness better. I strongly encourage you to do your research before you have a deaf and hard of hearing student in your classroom. And please learn to sign.